They whipped me for having twin baby girls. The words were not spoken, but breathed out in a ragged, frozen whisper, a puff of steam against the swirling snow. Jonah, a man who had made a covenant with silence, knelt and looked down at the woman. She was a ghost in the blizzard, half buried in a drift, her face a mask of bruised, frozen flesh. In the crook of her arm, wrapped in a blood-stained blanket, was a small, still bundle. And then he saw the other one, tucked against her chest, a second life flickering like a dying candle flame against its mother's failing warmth. He had been checking his high country traplines when he cut her tracks, a stumbling, desperate trail that spoke of a flight from hell itself. Now, seeing her broken body and the two impossibly small infants, he understood he had found hell's terminus. He was a man of the mountains, solitary by choice, his past a locked room he never visited. But the code he lived by was as stark and unyielding as the granite peaks around him. You do not let a thing die if you have the power to make it live. Without a word, he gently gathered the bundles, the infants so light they felt like nothing more than swaddled air, and secured them inside his thick winter coat. Then, with a strength born of a lifetime of hardship, he lifted the woman into his arms and turned back toward the distant smudge of smoke that was his cabin. The wind howled, trying to reclaim them, but Jonah leaned into it, his own life now a shield for three strangers. He did not know her name or her crime, only her sentence, whispered in the heart of the storm. For 2 weeks, the cabin was a place of quiet, rhythmic healing. It became a sanctuary governed by the steady crackle of the hearth, the simmering of herb-scented broth, and the faint, mewling cries of the infants. Jonah moved with a silent competence that was as much a part of him as the calluses on his hands. He cleaned and dressed the woman's wounds, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man of his size and rough appearance. The lash marks on her back were a testament to a brutality he couldn't comprehend, but he tended to them without judgment, his face an unreadable mask of concentration. The woman, whose name he would learn was Leah, drifted in and out of consciousness. In her waking moments, she would watch him, her eyes filled with a deep, animal fear that slowly gave way to a weary, cautious curiosity. She saw the way he handled her daughters, his large, rough hands impossibly delicate as he fed them warmed goat's milk from a piece of cloth. She saw the way he stoked the fire through the night to keep the chill at bay, his broad back a constant, solid presence between them and the hostile world outside. He never spoke to her beyond a quiet drink this or more wood for the fire. He asked no questions, made no demands. He simply provided a space for her to heal, a pocket of warmth and safety carved out of the vast, unforgiving winter. And in that silence, Leah began the slow, arduous process of choosing to live, not for herself, but for the two tiny, fragile heartbeats that were her whole world. The first truth came not in the weather outside, but in the frozen silence within the cabin. Leah was finally strong enough to sit by the fire on her own, one of the twins cradled in her arms. Jonah sat across from her, meticulously carving a piece of pine. He had been working on it for days, the small, sharp blade of his knife peeling away slivers of wood to reveal a shape within. "Rose," Leah said, her voice quiet but clear. Jonah's hand stilled. He looked up, his gaze questioning. "Her name is Rose," Leah repeated, stroking the baby's cheek. "And her sister is Lilia." It was an offering, a piece of herself given in return for his unspoken kindness. Jonah considered the names for a moment, then gave a slow, single nod. It was an acceptance, a validation. A few minutes later, he leaned forward and placed the finished carving in her free hand. It was a small, perfectly formed bird, its wings half spread as if ready for flight, the wood sanded so smooth it felt like polished stone. It was a thing of simple beauty, an object of creation in a life that had been defined by destruction. Leah curled her fingers around it, the warmth of the wood seeping into her skin. That evening, after he had gone to check his lines, she found one of his worn work shirts, a seam at the shoulder coming undone. With a needle and thread from her small salvaged bundle, she mended it with small, neat stitches. When he returned, he found it folded on his cot. He picked it up, ran a thumb over her careful handiwork, and the unspoken pact between them was sealed. They were no longer just a protector and a victim. They were partners in the quiet work of survival. As Leah's body healed, the story of her wounds finally found its voice. She told him one night, the cabin dark save for the flickering firelight that made shadows dance like ghosts on the log walls. Her voice was flat, devoid of self-pity, which only amplified the horror of her words. Her husband was Marcus Blackwood, a man of immense wealth and land, a tyrannical patriarch who ruled his valley with an iron fist. He had married her for one purpose, to give him a son, an heir to his name and his fortune. She had failed him twice before, and this third pregnancy was his final demand. When the midwife announced she had delivered not one, but 2 healthy baby girls, his rage had become a physical storm. He had seen the birth of 2 more daughters not as a miracle, but as a deliberate act of defiance, a final, unforgivable failure. He declared her barren of sons and therefore worthless. He had his overseer whip her in the courtyard as an example to the other women on his estate, then cast her out into the encroaching blizzard with her newborn infants, a sentence of death for all 3 of them. Jonah listened, his face carved from stone, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his chair. He had lived his life apart from the world of men precisely because he knew the kind of evil that lurked in hearts like Marcus Blackwood's. He understood now that he hadn't just rescued a woman from a storm, he had pulled her from the jaws of a monster. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the monster would one day come looking for what he considered his property. The deep snows of winter finally receded, giving way to the tender green of a mountain spring. The world outside the cabin was reborn, and inside, a new life was taking root. The grim necessity of survival softened into the gentle rhythm of a household. Jonah taught Leah how to read the tracks of deer and rabbits, how to handle a small rifle he owned, not as a weapon of aggression, but as a tool for providing and for protection. He showed her which mountain herbs were good for medicine and which roots were good for soup. In return, Leah brought a different kind of life to the cabin. She scrubbed the floors and washed the windows, letting in the clean spring light. She planted a small garden in a patch of earth Jonah cleared for her, coaxing life from the rocky soil with the same fierce patience she gave her daughters. The cabin, once a Spartan shelter for a solitary man, was now a home, filled with the soft gurgles of babies, the scent of baking bread, and the quiet, steady presence of a family being forged not by blood, but by choice. The twin girls, Rose and Lily, thrived under their mother's devoted care and their protector's watchful eye. He was no longer just the man who had saved them, he was a constant, solid figure in their small world, a source of safety and strength. He would sit for hours with one of the girls asleep on his chest, his large hand gently patting her back, a look of quiet wonder on his rugged face. The deep, lonely quiet of his old life had been replaced by a new, more meaningful silence, one filled with the promise of a future he had never dared to imagine for himself. The peace was shattered on a clear summer afternoon. A lone rider appeared at the edge of the clearing, a man in fine clothes astride a magnificent black horse. He was not a trapper or a lost traveler. He carried himself with an air of arrogant authority that felt like a poison in the clean mountain air. He did not dismount. He simply sat on his horse and stared at the cabin, his eyes cold and calculating. Jonah, who had been splitting wood, straightened up, the axe held loosely in his hand. Leah appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her arms wrapped around herself as if to ward off a sudden chill. The rider was one of Blackwood's men, a face she knew from the estate. The man's gaze swept over the scene, the neat garden, the smoke curling from the chimney, the palpable sense of order and peace, and a sneer touched his lips. He ignored Jonah completely and addressed Leah directly. "Mr. Blackwood sends his regards," the man said, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. "He has been patient. But his patience has its limits. He knows the girl survived. He will be coming to collect his daughters. He has no more use for you." He paused, letting the cruel word sink in. "He offers this man," he nodded curtly at Jonah, $100 in gold for his trouble. "He expects you to be gone when he arrives." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, leaving a profound and terrifying silence in his wake. The threat was no longer a distant possibility. It was a promise. The days that followed were taught with a heavy, unspoken dread. But fear did not paralyze them, it sharpened their resolve. Jonah became a different man. The quiet trapper was replaced by a grimly focused strategist. He worked from dawn until dusk, not with panic, but with a cold, deliberate purpose. He reinforced the cabin door, shuttered the windows with thick planks, and cleared sight lines around the clearing. He spent hours with his rifle, cleaning and oiling it, his movements economical and precise. He was not preparing for a battle, he was fortifying a fortress. Leah, for her part, refused to be a passive victim waiting for rescue. She channeled her terror into action, her every movement fueled by a fierce maternal instinct. She gathered and preserved every bit of food she could, ensuring they could withstand a siege. She practiced with the small rifle Jonah had given her until she could hit a tin can from 50 paces, her jaw set in a determined line. They were a team, a silent, efficient unit bound by a single, unwavering purpose, to protect Rose and Lily. They spoke little, but every shared glance, every nod of understanding, was a vow. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Jonah looked at her, his expression serious. "He will not have them," he said. It was not a boast or a promise. It was a statement of fact, as solid and immovable as the mountain at his back. And in his quiet certainty, Leah found the strength to quell the frantic beating of her own heart. Marcus Blackwood arrived with 4 hired men, a small army come to lay siege to their sanctuary. They rode into the clearing with the arrogant swagger of men who believed their victory was already assured. Blackwood, a large, imposing figure with a cruel set of eyes, dismounted and strode toward the cabin, a picture of righteous patriarchal fury. "Jonah," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the trees. "I know you're in there. Send out my property and I'll let you live." The cabin remained silent. The shuttered windows looked like closed, defiant eyes. Blackwood's face darkened with rage. "I gave you a chance, trapper. I will burn this shack to the ground with you in it." He motioned to his men, who began to dismount, their hands on their pistols. Suddenly, a voice, calm and clear, came not from the cabin, but from the high rocks that overlooked the clearing. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Blackwood." All 5 men spun around, their guns drawn, searching for the source of the voice. Jonah stood on a rocky outcrop above them, his rifle held loosely at his side, not even aimed at them. He was in a position of complete tactical advantage. "This is my land," Jonah stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are trespassers. Leave now." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your land? You think you can stop me?" "I have 4 guns here. You have 4 men who are being paid to be here," Jonah corrected him calmly. "But you are the only one who has anything to lose. Or have you forgotten about the charges filed with the federal marshal in Fort Gibson? Attempted murder of a woman and 2 infants. Abandonment. Cruelty. The marshal was very interested in your family affairs." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Blackwood's face. It was a bluff, but a masterfully played one. The hired guns exchanged uneasy glances. They were paid to intimidate a squatter, not to become accessories to a federal crime and get into a shootout with a man who held the high ground. Jonah's voice cut through their hesitation. "She is not your property. The girls are not your property. They are my family now. This is their home. You have no claim here. Not by law, and not by right." From a shuttered window in the cabin, the barrel of the small rifle appeared, steady and unwavering, aimed at the clearing. Leah's silent statement was clear. This was not a rescue. This was a defense. Blackwood saw it then. He saw the trapper on the rocks, a man who would not be bought or intimidated. He saw the rifle in the window, a sign that the woman he had broken was no longer afraid of him. He saw the wavering loyalty in his own men's eyes. His power, built on fear and brutality, was useless here. This mountain, this cabin, this strange, silent man and the woman he protected, they operated under a different, more fundamental law. With a snarl of pure, impotent fury, he spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he snarled, but the threat was hollow. He mounted his horse, and without another look back, he and his men rode away, their retreat a stark admission of defeat. They were swallowed by the forest, and the deep, peaceful silence of the mountain returned. The threat was gone, but the life they had built remained, stronger and more real than ever. That evening, Jonah took his knife and, on the heavy wooden lintel above the cabin door, he began to carve. First, he carved the name Leah. Then, in smaller letters beneath it, Rose and Lily. He worked for a long time, the firelight catching the sharp planes of his face. When he was done, he looked at Leah, a question in his eyes. She understood. She took the knife from his hand and, next to her name, she carefully carved the name Jonah. Their family was now written in wood, a permanent declaration. The years that followed were quiet and good. The cabin on the mountain became a true sanctuary. Rose and Lily grew from infants into laughing, curious girls with their mother's dark hair and their adopted father's steady gaze. They knew only the safety of the mountain and the fierce, unconditional love of their parents. The story of the trapper who faced down Marcus Blackwood became a quiet legend in the valleys below, and soon, others began to find their way to the remote homestead. A widow fleeing a cruel family, a young boy who had run away from an orphanage, they found a place where they would not be judged, only sheltered. The solitary cabin grew, becoming a small, self-sufficient homestead, a community of healed souls. Jonah and Leah, the stoic protector and the resilient survivor, had not just built a family, they had created a haven. This story teaches us a powerful lesson about the nature of strength and family. It shows that true strength isn't about wealth or power, but about the quiet resolve to protect the vulnerable. It reminds us that family isn't just about the blood you share, but about the love you give and the home you build in each other's hearts. Jonah and Leah, two people discarded by the world, found in each other the courage to heal the past and build a future filled with peace and hope. Their sanctuary on the mountain stands as a testament to the idea that even in the harshest wilderness, the most beautiful things can grow. If you were inspired by this story of survival, justice, and the creation of a found family, please consider subscribing to our channel and tapping the notification bell. We believe in the power of stories to lift the human spirit, and we would be honored to share more of them with you. Thank you for watching, and may you find your own sanctuary in the people you love.